Very pleased to have everybody joining us today, and want to thank those people that have helped us to be here today. I have just heard from our guest speaker who will be joining us very soon. I'm really, I don't know if excited is the right word to hear about slavery. It is a disappointing subject, but if it exists, then I think we need to hear about it and find out what's going on. Now, at this time, I think, Sonu, I might invite you to unmute and give us an update.
Thank you, President Mark, and fellow Rotarians, for this opportunity to give you an update on the Youth Committee, and I wish you a very happy New Year. I think the first time we are meeting, I'm able to see you all. So a very warm welcome to the 2022, and greetings from the Youth Committee. Its committee is made up of members, and I am sitting here because of the great hard work that all the members of the committee put into this committee. So thank you, all the members, and to fellow Rotarians who are supporting the committee. At the outset, I just want to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land. And as you all know, that Rotary Club of Sydney endorses the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So when I took on the Youth Committee, I was, the youth has been under tutelage of our President Mark Dyer before, and I thought that, such a great legacy moving forward, what are the two focus areas that I would like to concentrate on and steer the committee towards that direction? And the two areas where we thought that we have made some kind of headwind is the cross-Rotary collaboration. I'm going to talk to you about it, and really putting the spotlight on the youth programs that are, that are embedded through sponsorship and mentorship and can empower our youth. So at the beginning of this Rotary year, we had two important programs that we wanted to support young and emerging leaders, right from the early starters to somebody who is in the early 20s, through our two programs, flagship programs, the Rotary Youth Leadership Award and National Youth Science Forum. You all are aware of these programs, but I'm going to share with you some of those champions of these awards that we had the opportunity to sponsor this year. And that should give a joy to all you Rotarians, because all your contributions goes in supporting these bright and emerging leaders. So for the National Youth Science Fellowship Scholarship, we identified through a very rigorous process of interviews, mentorship, so on and so forth. So 4 brilliant scholars, Anna Karina Lloyd, Garima Manali, Ananya Sinan Saloni Jaiswal. These 4 bright students have received this award, and this gave some really fantastic feedback about their participation in the program. And what we did this year was that we collaborated with other clubs like Rotary Club Botany, Rotary Club Darling Harbour and Brisbane to, kind of co-share the amount of scholarship that we would like to support these candidates with. So it was like, we are supporting some amount of money, and the other clubs are chipping in with some contributions as well. So that was really brilliant. We also had the Ryla Youth Award, and I'm very pleased to share that 2021-22, we identified 3 brilliant women of diversity from different backgrounds. Sarah Lynn, who comes from rural New South Wales. Amy Dyer, she's a social worker and also happens to be the daughter, a proud daughter of our President Mark Dyer. And Sarah Long, an emerging financial expert in Sydney. And all these 3 brilliant women really inspire me of what the future holds for Australia. So watch out for these women and what they're going to achieve in years to come. Brilliant scholars. Now, at the beginning of the year, I think something I was very passionate about was Rotary Youth Talks. And you'd have heard so much buzz about this program, but let me tell you, this has been quite an experience for all of us. We have identified some brilliant emerging youth leaders from the community, and we asked them to come and share their joy with our club. And we really had some great feedback from the University of Wollongong to University of Newcastle, to somebody studying anthropology, to someone sharing the joy of doing science with, Parkinson's disease to amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So brilliant range of scholars coming from different fields and sharing their passion for youth and leadership. So just to give you a snapshot of what happened last year, we had some, so Courtney Krahe from the Rotary youth division. So, she shared, Lara Rutstein was there, Michael Velseski from the Illawarra Health Institute. It was kindly supported by, veteran Rotarian Dot Hennessy. Rotary Youth Talks, and I think towards the end of the year, we had a brilliant, roundtable discussion with Rabbi Zalman Kastel. If any of you know about Rabbi Kastel, he is an amazing advocate for youth, and it was really brilliant to have Kalisha Bennett and his entire team to talk about the initiatives that they're leading in the community and in partnership with Rotary. We have a very strong connection with this particular foundation, and I think moving forward, this is a great part of what Rotary does, and creates these spin-offs that goes on to support communities. So look at this extraordinary list of speakers that we identified. We had six of them to speak in the last 6 months, and I'm looking forward to another 7 and probably more in the next 6 months. So watch out for those updates, and please join us if you can in Rotary. And if you can identify one youth leader in your community, please give a shout out, and let's sponsor and support these emerging scholars. Today, I've got something interesting for you. As you know, the YES Scholarship, which was initiated by past President Kathy Taton, was a very strong advocate for our community in the Redfern area, so on and so forth. Now, Mr. John Snellgrove, a fellow Rotarian, has taken over the reins of that particular program. And we have a great scholarship now to support 14 to 18-year-old young and emerging bright candidates so if you know somebody from the regional area or from metropolitan Sydney, we can sponsor at least 4 from the regional areas and 4 from the metropolitan Sydney. So please nominate candidates. We are looking actively for you to support these programs. And if you want to support the program, please reach out to us. The winners will be announced on 5th of April, and the nominations are closing on 28th of February. Last but not the least, I'll leave you. I think the actions talk more louder than words. So I will leave you with a testimonial from one of the scholar who attended the NYSF program and left her these feedback. And she says, Anna Karina Lloyd, I'm quoting, "Just thought I should update you on NYSF now that it's nearly the end. It has been absolutely amazing, and all the lectures have been so interesting. One of the highlights was a live across to the CERN in Switzerland. It was absolutely fascinating learning about how it works and getting to see the inside of the machine. I'm also really glad that this program has helped me narrow down what I want to do after school. Thank you so much for making this opportunity possible. And I can assure you, I will never forget some of the valuable things I've learned and heard." That's what you all are doing. Fellow Rotarians, your contributions are empowering these young and emerging scholars to take up these leadership positions. So thank you all as I told you, this is a village and a community, and we are here because of these great people that you see on the screen. And I want to thank all of you, all the fellow members, Thelma, Deborah, Mark, Gillian, Jeff Bilbo, Lena, who's not here, but she continues to support our programs, John Selgrove and Ronnie Korn. All of you have been instrumental in what we do. Finally, I just want to leave you with these words of our former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And he said, I quote, "Young people are gifted with open minds and are bringing their energy, ideas, and courage to some of the most complex and important challenges facing the human family. They often understand better than older generations, that we can transcend our religious and cultural differences in order to reach our shared goals. With those words, I want to thank you all, and thank you, President Martha, and thank you everyone for supporting Youth Committee. It's your committee, so please join when you can. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sonu. That's an excellent presentation, and that's great work. And I think the thing about the National Youth Science Forum and RYLA is it's more than the event itself. The events are fantastic, even though RYLA, has to be rescheduled. But it's the process. And I've been involved in this process with Sonu, and Sonu invites each applicant to write a letter to us and send their CV, and he instructs them what to put in the letter, and then he organises an interview, and I've attended a few of them, and they are quite fantastic, I have to say. If you're, wanting to lift your Saturday, then attending one of these interviews with Sonu is quite brilliant. And these young people might feel a little bit nervous turning up, thinking they're being interviewed by 3 or 4 Rotarians, but I assure you, when they leave, they have wind in their wings, and they have an enormous amount of motivation and ideas for the future, and passion and all that sort of thing. It really is fantastic, Sonu, the way that you've put the process around it, and to build it up, to make them value it, and also to let them know that we value them as well. So that really is fantastic, Sonu, because it's one thing just having access to these projects, and some clubs might just scurry around looking for people to send, but I really think that the process, is really important. So thank you for the commitment, the work that you put into making that process and executing it in the way that you do. Over to you, Karen.
So the lady in question is Libby Sorrell, and she's going to talk about modern slavery. And she's been involved in human rights issues since the late 70s, initially through Amnesty International, of which she's still a member. The inaugural Stop the Traffic conference in 2007 in Sydney heightened her awareness that people trafficking and slavery still occur in almost every country of the world, including Australia. And she joined the organisation in 2009, soon after it was established in Australia. Stop the Traffic, with the support of like-minded individuals and groups, made a major contribution to the passing of Australia's Modern Slavery Act in November 2018. I've read up quite a bit on modern slavery, as it's an interesting part of the world, and I think that many of us have a misconception that it's merely people working in slave conditions, meaning they're not paid, they're not properly looked after, etc. And it's interesting that yesterday in the Financial Review, there was an article about the law to fight modern slavery called into question, or that's the title of the article. I don't know if many people know that, well, I've just said that the Modern Slavery Act came in 2018 in Australia. And it says the Modern Slavery Act applies to companies based in or operating in Australia with annual consolidated revenue of 100 million or more. And we actually in the office had to fill in one of these reporting forms about one of our tenants who was in that category. So that was quite interesting. And it was following whether, any of our suppliers and what have you. So they look at all the stakeholders. What they did review of it, and they found that 77% of companies had failed to comply with basic reporting standards mandated by the law, and more than half had failed to identify obvious modern slavery risks in their operations or supply chains. So I guess it's one thing to have a law and another thing for people to comply and do the right thing. Do we have a speaker yet, Mark?
No, not to my knowledge. So the article you're referring to, this is talking about Australian firms and the reporting requirements of Australian firms.
Yes.
And Australian suppliers, I imagine.
The companies have to report, but my understanding, having our experience in the office, is that they have to give information about all their stakeholders. And as their landlord, we would be a stakeholder. So, you know, they're trying to see whether there are networks of, you know, slavery and you know, illegal operations.
Yeah, well, that's right. You know, they may well operate out of an office. So, you know, that's one way, I suppose, of identifying them. You know, for companies like yours that are doing the reporting, I imagine you are now.
No, we're not. No, we're not actually. We weren't the subject of the request, but because we're the landlord of a company of that size, heavens, we're not a company of that size, but
Right.
But the landlord of a company that size, we had to fill in something. I don't know, my bookkeeper filled it in.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Yes, it certainly is.
And Mark looks like he's got our speaker.
Karen, it's such an important and emerging issue, this modern slavery, and I'm very glad that you and the club has invited somebody to speak about this. Specifically in America, it's a huge issue, and also now in Australia, and it has got exacerbated during COVID-19 when we are saying, sometimes. The vulnerable communities being more affected by some of these forces. So it's great that this topic is being discussed, and thank you, Karen and club, to recognize this problem.
So, Mr. President, how are we going?
Hi, sorry about that, Karen. I do have Libby on my phone now, and she has sent to me her presentation. And so we're going to coordinate this, Libby, aren't we?
We are. It'll be interesting. I'm sure you can manage.
Look, initially, Libby, we've read out your introduction, and we have quite a nice audience here who are rather interested in this subject. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done in this area and for joining us today. And of course, having some technology problems is a minor problem in
major. I'm in between
comparison.
two companies. I'm in between two companies. They're each blaming each other. So, and I'm stuck in the middle at Tuesday lunchtime in the middle of your Rotary meeting. So,
yeah,
unfortunate. That's
okay. So, what is modern slavery? Is the question that we have on the slide.
Right. Okay, so okay, let's start then. Well, look, thank you very much for having me, everybody. And I would normally give the acknowledgement of country from Springwood Blue Mountains, where I am. I am in Darug and Gundagara country, and I pay my respects to elders and their people, past, present, and emerging. And I do know quite a few Indigenous people in the area and surrounds. All right, so modern slavery is an umbrella term. Just next, please, Michael.
Yep, or Mark.
Mark, sorry, Mark. Yes, Mark.
It's okay.
Start.
Been called worse.
Okay, so our name is Be Slavery Free, which was only changed a couple of years ago. We were called Stop the Traffic, but because of modern definitions and because our work is slightly different from the English Stop the Traffic, we have renamed ourselves Be Slavery Free. But trafficking is still a really important component of what we look at. So it always involves some sort of movement. And it doesn't have to be a long distance. It can just be within one suburb. There's always deception. For instance, young students, well, young girls who think they're going to be students are invited to come to Australia to learn English, and then they find themselves in the red light districts of King's Cross and other parts of Sydney. So it does happen in Australia as well. Sometimes it's coercion. And the purpose is always exploitation. It's always somebody having power over somebody else. Now, these definitions, thanks very much, Mark. So slavery is the tradition, the actual definition. Slavery, that's the traditional one we think of, where somebody owns somebody else. Servitude is where someone's not free to stop working. Now, an interesting example of servitude also in Australia is just last year, a married couple in Melbourne were convicted for 8 years and 6 years respectively for having an Indian lady in their house doing housework for 15 years. And that was a good example of deception. She was told she was going to come and work as do their housework with a proper wage, but she ended up working as a slave for 15 years, and it was recognised that it was actually a form of slavery. That's servitude. And then the next one there, I think on the same slide, is forced labour. Yep. It's a bit similar, but forced labour means when people are forced to work under the menace of penalty. And the important aspect of forced labour is that often a whole country will do it as a government-sponsored system. And we'll talk a bit about that later in a couple of countries. I think on the next slide, Mark, is debt bondage. Yes. That's an interesting one. This is where often whole families are in debt, for instance, in India to a brick kiln. And as it says there, the debt never finishes, because they never actually are told, okay, your debt will finish in a certain year. They work hard, I think, assuming they're going to pay off their debt. Debt meaning that they are given very, very meagre food and lodging, living, for example, in the brick kiln where they are. So they're always told they're just perpetually in debt. And as I said, children are born into debt bondage. There are other examples which we'll come to. And then forced marriage, unfortunately, is an issue in Australia. There are a few particular suburbs of Sydney where young year 11 and 12 students, girls, just disappear, and they've been sent back to the country of their family of origin to be married, usually to an older person, much older, usually a second or third cousin. Now, there was a picture that I actually sent to the committee, but I'll just mention this. Some of you will have seen it. There's a lovely Indian lady who paints henna, and a few of us were on a trip to India few years ago to be educated about slavery, and our sister organisation trained women in alternative income to working in the sex industry. And long story short, this lovely lady was actually freed because we were able to pay her $50 each to paint our hands with henna, and she was able to pay her debt back to the brothel and sent back to India. So I think we might be up to the facts and figures ones, Mark, is that correct?
There's a slide about child labour.
Oh, child labour, all right, yep, that's all right, child labour, yes. So currently there are about 152 to 160 million children in child labour. Now, this doesn't mean child work. Obviously, it's good for kids maybe aged about 14, 15, 16, like our own kids, to get jobs after school. Child labour is different. It deprives children of their childhood, interferes with their schooling, can be mentally, physically dangerous, and then, as it says there, children are often enslaved. And then within the ILO, are you familiar with the abbreviation ILO? It's the International Labour Organization. Right. The worst forms of child labour are when children under 18 are trafficked, sexually exploited, and that makes me quite angry. Worse during COVID, that one actually is. Often they're used to produce or traffic drugs or be involved in other criminal behaviour. And as I said, work's likely to harm their morals, and then also it's just hard physical labour. So what's been happening under COVID? In some places, trafficking has become less frequent, but unfortunately under COVID, people are less able to escape. And sister organisation to ours who actually work in helping people escape, obviously you don't have the same access to people. The mass cancellations, you might remember earlier on when COVID started, there was a bit of an outcry about shops like Kmart who just cancelled all their clothing orders because people weren't going shopping anymore. So there's been mass unemployment, and obviously in a lot of countries from where our clothing comes, there's no social security like what we have, and people were begging for work just for food or for sexual favours. And then vulnerable populations become worse off. And then, as we also know, obviously there was some demand for labour because we all needed PPE. And so that in some ways that's been quite good, but we have heard of quite a few countries where people are being exploited, even making rubber gloves. And if you have a look on our Be Slavery Free Facebook page, you'll see recent news about Canada where they've refused to buy PPE from certain companies because they're using slave labour. Okay, so are we up to the one, Mark, about children and modern slavery?
Well, I'm up to the facts and figures.
Okay, sorry, maybe they're a bit out of sync. That's okay. So the facts and figures, it's the fastest growing international crime, and human trafficking generates an estimated 150 billion each year. Now, think of how much tax would be paid for people who, if people were paid properly and paying tax for their country. So traffickers and slave masters, they're earning squillions. Approximately 25,200 new slaves every day, 70% of them female. And I'll show you a photo later. Some of the evidence is visible from space. All right, so we might just go down to more about COVID. Is that okay, Mark?
Yes, so some more facts and figures on the next slide.
Yeah, I think skip that one and we'll go down to the second COVID-19 and modern slavery about children.
Countries with the highest number of slaves.
Oh, yes, okay. Actually, I was supposed to skip that one and get people to guess. But anyway, I think you'll see there that India has the highest number of slaves. But actually, does anybody want to hazard a guess as to which country has the highest actual proportion of slaves to their population? I wouldn't have known this. If anybody wants to have a quick guess. Any thoughts?
Yes, a good question.
I don't know if you can unmute easily to do that.
Yes, do we have any
guesses as to which country has the most slaves?
Anyone would like to unmute and choose a country? I don't know.
This is Adrienne. I'm guessing Democratic Republic of Congo. That's
a pretty good thought. Yes, they're one of the highest. What worries me about the Congo is the child exploitation for the ingredients of our mobile phones. But actually, the country with the highest proportion of slaves is actually apparently North Korea. 1/10 of their population are in forced labour. So I was quite surprised about that.
Yes. All
right. So Mark, maybe we'll move on to then. Can you see the second slide about children and COVID?
Now,
modern slavery.
Yeah, so the COVID, it's headed COVID-19 and modern slavery.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
And then one about children. The next one.
Another one, two about modern slavery. I may have missed one about children.
Don't worry. Well, look, I'll just talk about it and we can skip over. That's fine. So sadly, I think we sort of love our children. We do the best for them. They have every after-school opportunity available, or a lot of kids do. And so we tend to be quite surprised. But in very, very poor communities, in poor countries, parents will actually sometimes sell their children or hire them out. And this is what's happened during COVID. Online sexual exploitation for children increased. So young children are hired out to be used in pornography, which is, we think, is terrible. Schools are closed, obviously, in a lot of countries, and not everybody has access to computers and, Zoom learning as we have in Australia. And then, interestingly, what we're talking before about forced marriage, a lot more young girls have been sent into forced marriages because often the parents think they're safer if they're married, and also less financial burden on them. So gains made about more children in school have been set back at least 5 years due to COVID. Okay, so a bit of a change of topic now, modern slavery and climate change. Can you see that one there, Mark?
Yes. Yes, we had that, Libby.
All right. So it's extreme weather events, and it's a vicious cycle, which we will see. I'll just give two examples, and it just coincidentally, the two examples I will give are from commodities that we have had campaigns about for the last few years, and they're fishing and cocoa. So in fishing, reduced fish stocks due to overfishing and pollution and ocean warming. This is very well documented, actually. It's quite interesting. Result of ecosystem changes. But what it means is that the fish aren't found close to shore anymore, which means fishing boats have to go way out far to sea. And then I'll get on to that story maybe in a minute. Yeah, so there's an example of a fellow called Tway, you might see there. So Tway, can you see the one about Tway? It says he was living in a family in Myanmar where there was no food due to drought, and so they sent Tway off down to Bangkok to work in a factory. Yeah. But once he arrived in Bangkok, he was told, well, actually, sorry, there's no factory job, but you owe $2,000 in food for your transport down here from Myanmar. You have to work on a boat. And if you don't work on one of our boats, your family will be punished. So long story short, this poor fellow called Tway ended up being working as a slave on this boat for 17 whole years. So that was what happened to Tway, the true story. Wow. So the ILO is trying to intervene there, and obviously I can't do it at the moment, but if you go onto our website, you will find 3 really good Vimeos, and that's not a typo, somebody accused me of once. It is Vimeo, not video, of 3 stories, and Tway is one of the subject of one of the stories. Thanks, Mark. So maybe the next one. And then, so have you found cocoa?
Yes. Yeah.
Good. All right. So this is an interesting one. We have been on about chocolate for many years. So as far as it relates to climate change, this is a good example of where it's a vicious circle, because the very, very poor people in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, they actually are contributing to climate change by chopping down vast swathes of forest in order to grow cocoa trees. And of course, replacing the natural forest by cocoa doesn't really help, because it takes many, many decades for a cocoa tree to grow. So, and then of course it doesn't help them anyway, because it even causes local climate change and meaning less rainfall. So the families are very poor because of drought. They can't grow food. The cocoa trees take a long time to produce food. So then they go out chopping down more trees to plant more cocoa, and so the vicious cycle goes on. So even apart from climate change, our big issue has been that the big, very wealthy chocolate companies, I think, Mark, we might be up to the one now that says up to 70% of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Well done. Thank you. You're doing a great job, Mark.
Thank you.
Yes. So much of the world's cocoa comes from West Africa, these 2 countries, because they happen to have the right climate. So unlike big tea plantations and coffee plantations, cocoa farms are small. They're just family-owned farms, and as I said, some are hidden, and because they are cutting down these trees illegally. So although the farmers, most of them live below the poverty line, the global chocolate industry is worth $138 billion a year. They earn squillions. So that includes Cadbury's, who's actually owned by Mondelez, and Ferrero Rocher, Nestle, all the big chocolate companies. So all the farms use child labour, and the reason the farmers use their own kids as labour on their farms is because they're not earning enough to pay people. Now, just imagine, in Australia, we benefit a lot by our wheat crop and sheep, but countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana do not reap the same benefits from their product of cocoa. And it's simply because the big chocolate companies, as I said, and us, ultimately buying chocolate, are not paying the people enough. Just imagine how much tax they would be able to pay if they were earning proper money, these poor farmers in Ivory Coast. So child labour is a complex issue. Also, if a lot of children just never become properly educated, they can't grow up to contribute in more useful ways to their own country, and the countries just stay in poverty. As I said, most of them don't attend school. The next slide, oh yes, about 12,000 people have been trafficked from neighbouring countries. If you're interested, if you just Google or whatever you use, Abdul Cocoa Slave, you'll find a very good CNN video about this young slave called Abdul, who was tricked into going to work on a cocoa farm. So child labour is complex. Just because we pay the farmers enough doesn't mean there still won't be any child labour, because often in these very isolated areas, there are no schools anyway, and I suppose just for childcare, the kids are just sent out to work. But interestingly, because the big chocolate companies are worried about their future supply of cocoa, one would like to think altruistic reasons as well, the chocolate companies are actually now pouring large sums of money into the cocoa industry, but not enough, and they're not paying a living wage. And we can probably skip it. Now, can you find the slide with a picture of two boys, Mark?
Yes.
So that's Abdul. That's just
Right. It's trying to load. Is that a video?
Yes, but we won't worry about that. We'll just skip that one.
Yeah. Okay.
We won't try and load the video.
So the next slide is again about chocolate. You've spoken about this, I think, though. The International Cocoa Initiative.
Oh, yes, that's right, yes. So this is just an example of what some of the cocoa companies, chocolate companies are trying to do. And believe it or not, a lot of people, what's the word, a bit disparaging about Nestle with various, various transgressions Nestle has been responsible for. But give them their due, Nestle started this CLRMS, Child Labour Remediation, etc., where they actually go into the farms and encourage the families not to use their children in growing cocoa, encourage them to go to school, etc., etc. And there has been some success there. And the governments of Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana introduced this living income differential, but that was only last year, so we haven't seen good results of that yet. And the idea of that is that if the world cocoa price is way below what the farmers need to live on, the chocolate companies have to top it up to give them a decent wage. And then this is just very recent news, that the green one about Nestle. They have said that they will actually encourage cocoa farmers to send their children to school by paying those particular farmers more money if they're not using child labour. But then other people say, well, they should be paying all the farmers a decent price. But it's the low world market prices that is part of the problem. Now, you're probably familiar with fair trade. Some of you are probably familiar. If you go to the next slide, Mark, you'll see three fairly well-known symbols: Fair Trade, UTS and Rainforest Alliance.
Yes, got them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So probably a few of you are aware of that. You might remember that a few years ago, Cadbury's introduced the Fair Trade logo on some of their chocolate. They've stopped doing that now, and because they said it cost them too much to have inspectors come in. But believe it or not, they are still using the same inspectors to come and inspect their farms anyway for child labour. UTS and Rainforest Alliance have now combined. McDonald's use Rainforest Alliance coffee. Kit Kats use UTS, and a lot of Aldi chocolate around Easter time, they use UTS as well. So you'll see a note there about the Slavery Free Chocolate Scorecard. Every year we interview and survey large and small chocolate companies to see what they're doing about slavery and trafficking and child labour, and then we produce a scorecard so people can choose which are the most ethical Easter eggs to buy. So that's what that's about. And
who might that be?
That's a good question. It's usually, believe it or not, Ferrero Rocher are fairly good. Lindt are reasonable because they have a farm to shop shelf. I think that's the farm to shelf policy, where Lindt actually own their own chocolate, their own cocoa farms, so they have a bit more control over what happens on their farms. So Lindt are quite good. Cadbury's are still okay. Mondelez are still okay. Most of the big ones are improving, but none of them are really good. The best ones really are the more boutique, smaller companies, which some of them sell their chocolate bars in regular supermarkets. Some of them you have to buy online. And I think it's also quantities of scale. But what is it? Quantities of scale. Is that the word? You know what I mean? Something something to do with scale, to do with often the smaller chocolate companies who are fair trade have to charge more for their chocolate. But yeah, so it is possible to buy fully ethical chocolate. So look out for that scorecard when it comes.
I just bumped my phone and accidentally moved forward a few slides. We're at 19 of 28. We've got a few minutes left.
Yes, well, just rest assured, everybody, we won't be doing that. I'm looking at the time, it's 1:26. I think, so do we need to finish pretty strictly in a couple of minutes to allow question time?
Yeah, we could probably push through a little bit more if there was something you wanted to jump to.
Sure. Okay. The next couple are important because they're things about which we have a petition and it's topical. So basically in China, you might have heard that more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities are in these re-education camps. Now, the point about these re-education camps is they are producing clothing and TVs and mobile phones and rubber tyres and components for cars that we in Australia and the other countries use all the time. So Senator Rex Patterson, you'll see the last point there. Have you got that one up there, Mark?
Yes.
It's in blue. He is a South Australian senator where quite a few Uyghurs happen to live, people who've been able to migrate to Australia. And they asked Senator Patterson if he would put up a bill in Parliament asking Australia to ban any imports of items made by the Uyghurs. So long story short, the bill did pass the Senate. It still needs to pass the lower house. And in order to pass, even in the Senate, it had to be extended to not just the Uyghurs, but any forced labour. I think they thought he was showing too much favouritism just towards that group because there is forced labour in other countries as well, as we have said. So there's a petition there, just go to Be Slavery Free /Uyghur, and there's a petition that we can sign there. And also, which I'll mention it now while I'm at it actually. If any of you do have the time and interest, we would love you to contact your own MPs and encourage them to get this bill up in the lower house so that it can be voted on. And we're particularly interested to know which MPs are supporting it in view of the election coming up. And can you see the one there with the satellite images?
That's the next slide.
Great.
That's this one.
Oh, yeah. So that's China China tries to deny that this is happening, but as you can see, nothing much on this particular area of land in 2015, a bit more 2018, and a whole lot more in 2002. They're big internment camps. All right, so we are moving on. Some of you might be aware that Rotary, a particular subgroup of Rotary, has been interested in slavery, and there's an organisation called RAGAS. And I have met the fellow mentioned down there. His name is Tony Stokes, sorry. So he is trying to enthuse Australian Rotarians to become more involved in anti-slavery work. Now, we all know that Rotary does a fantastic job on a wide variety of fronts. So obviously we can't expect everybody to, but he would like a few more to. So there's quite a good presentation there with the link to it. And if you're interested, you can look up RAGAS. If you just go www.ragas online, you'll find what RAGAS in Australia is doing.
Yeah, fabulous.
I was quite excited. They even wanted to start a big art competition based in schools, but I don't think much has come of it. I think they're wanting a bit more people to get behind it. So here we are. So what can we do? What are your candidates' positions on banning imports made with forced labour? Oh, yes, and notice that these countries haven't sent diplomats to the Beijing Games. And then, just briefly, the Modern Slavery Act was passed a couple of years ago, but it's a bit toothless, we think, because there are no penalties for failure to report or to investigate properly. And 70% of countries surveyed recently found that they had not reported on forced labour in their products. I've mentioned their cotton and tomatoes. Believe it or not, apparently tomatoes are grown in this slavery area of northwest China with the Uyghurs. Then they shipped off to South America, come back to Australia, relabelled produce of Argentina or whatever country it is, so that they appear not to come from the Uyghurs in China. So China gets away with it. That's one example of how they get away with it. And cotton is a very large industry in China, particularly in this northwest, where Xinjiang province of China. So that's what that's about. And then the ILO, you might have read ahead a little bit there. Interestingly, in the days when Indigenous people were still working as domestic workers, there was a law in Western Australia that was considered to be okay. They have finally amended their Industrial Relations Act, so Australia can now sign the ILO's protocol against forced labour. So one would think that with our Modern Slavery Act and with the ILO's protocol against forced labour, you would think gradually in the richer countries of the world things should improve. But what we basically want the general public to do is be very fussy about, with new knowledge that they have about what they buy, where they buy it, and if you go into a shop, just as the next slide will show, be a curious shopper. So more details about that protocol is there, the Be Slavery Free ILO Forced Labour Protocol. And so what can we do? Be a curious and aware shopper. All that list of products there are all things that can be made with slavery and trafficking and forced labour. Sign our petitions, that would be great. If you would like to receive our campaign updates, you can go online and do it, or just let me know. Regular or one-off donations. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much, Mark, for your great assistance.
You're welcome, Libby.
Questions, very welcome.
Thank you for joining us. Very interesting subject. We did hear from Karen about the point you mentioned about the underreporting of Australian companies on this subject. Karen mentioned there was an article in yesterday's Financial Review.
Oh, really? Well, there you go. That's something that I'll have to look up. That's good. Yeah, the Fin Review are pretty good with that sort of issue.
Yes. Would anybody like to ask Libby a question? If you do, just unmute.
Can I ask a question, Mark?
Yeah, do Sonu, so I can see questions in the notes. I haven't been monitoring, but yeah, over to you, Sonu.
Thank you, President Mark, and thank you, Libby, for joining us today. Fantastic presentation and for educating us about modern slavery. My question is with regards to that many of us, we don't know that there are about 15,000 people, that's about 2018 stats, live under modern slavery in Australia. And
Correct.
as you would, 15,000 people live in modern slavery in Australia. And as you expect, much of this will be underreported. Now, if you look at the topic in general, and if you go to the segmental analysis, you will realize that it's predominantly the migrant workers or the temporary casual workers who are most vulnerable for modern slavery. And they're most likely to be in the meat industries, agriculture, and hospitality industries.
Yes.
Now, as a community organization, what are our responsibility and what can we do to increase awareness and targeted actions to prevent modern slavery? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. What I should point out, I suppose, is that the 15,000 people are possibly people who are even treated more badly than some of these people. Often it's hidden, and it's only discovered after somehow they manage to escape. I think all we can really do is put pressure on the government. As we know, often this topic comes up. And as you know, also with COVID, a lot of agricultural, a lot of farmers were worried because they could not find enough workers, could they, to harvest their crops. So all we can really do is put pressure on the government to put pressure on these farmers to pay these people properly. But it's an example of it's a grey area. The people who come and exploited, say picking fruit and picking vegetables, they still get a small amount of pay. They are not the ones that would be included in this in those stats. The ones in these stats are mostly people working in private houses, in construction, in the sex industry, some in the clothing industry, in the restaurant industry, in Australia, and they're the ones that really slide under the mat that are not seen. So, but to answer your question, it's a very good question, and we all as consumers also have to be prepared, I suppose, to pay a bit more for our strawberries and our raspberries and produce like that in the supermarkets, and not expect Coles and Woolworths and possibly Aldi to sort of have a race to the bottom to get contractors to offer them the least price for their products.
Yes.
So I think yes, it's so from the consumer point of view, it's been willing to pay a decent price, and it's also us. We could also contact our local MPs about it too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Libby. Fatima had a similar question about what we might be able to do. So thank you for answering that. At this point, I might invite Shirley to offer a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark, and special thanks to Libby. I've actually been working for some years with Graduate Women International and the United Nations on this international issue, and I've been very familiar also with the work of Stop the Traffic and the contribution it's made towards passing Australia's Modern Slavery Act in 2018. I wasn't aware that it's now called Be Slavery Free, Libby. And many Australians are unaware not only of the people working under slave conditions within Australia, but the supply chains for some of Australia's biggest businesses are culprits when it comes to treating their workers overseas in slave conditions. So we're particularly grateful to learn more about this issue and the wonderful work you're doing, and congratulate you and your colleagues to honour your attendance today, and particularly under those challenging conditions at the beginning of our session. We'll be giving a donation of $100 to Rotary International. It's an agency for working around the world on several issues, including this one. So thank you, Libby, from all of us.
Thank you very much, Shirley. So, Shirley, that's interesting. So can you tell me again the name of the organisation you work for?
Oh, I've been working with the United Nations, and there's two particular women from Canada who've just published a very important book about slavery conditions around the world. Graduate Women International has been involved in supporting their work.
Good, yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. So I would encourage you to have a look at our website, just beslaveryfree.com, and then you'll see the couple of petitions that I've mentioned. The one about, oh, that's right. Actually, sorry, very quickly, I don't think I actually mentioned the seafood petition. So have a look at that about seafood and
that might have been in your presentation. I will include a recap of your presentation in my bulletin this week.
That's a good idea. That would be great.
I have you on the recipient list for that too, Libby, so you can correct me if I inevitably make a mistake.
No, that would be a great idea. And thank you so much, Mark, for your brilliant swapping from one side to the next. You did a fantastic job. Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody, for listening.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Libby. I appreciate you doing that. And yeah, hopefully your internet is working again up there in the mountains.
I hope so. Yes.
So look, I'll conclude our meeting now, and just want to thank Sonu and Karen and Shirley and Jeff, who's helped with pull us together today. Of course, Adrienne, who always does. And thank you guys for attending.